At UFC 308, Ilia Topuria defeated Max Holloway in a shocking contest where he became the first man to KO the seemingly granite chin of Max Holloway, which sent shockwaves around the MMA world and caused up a debate. Does Ilia Topuria have the two best back-to-back wins in MMA history? With a whole bunch of legendary fighters in MMA history with amazing wins, and some of them having some stacked back-to-back wins, what better time than now to look back at some of these legendary victories? This is the Fight Franchise and the top 10 back-to-back wins in MMA history. Number 10. Anderson Silva, the man who at the time of making this list hosts the best win streak in UFC history with 16 consecutive wins in a row while facing the best competition in the middleweight division. With a legendary resume with wins over the best of his era, it was just deciding which two sets of wins back to back we admire the most. In 2010, well into his middleweight title run, Anderson Silva faced his toughest test in a wrestling standout in Chael Sonnen, who at the time posed huge threats to Anderson Silva, and it showed in the octagon, dominating Silva across the first 4 rounds of the fight, where Sonnen was 1 round away from dethroning the legendary Anderson Silva. Silva would do the unthinkable and find a triangle choke in the final round to steal victory from the jaws of defeat to defend his world title against his toughest contender yet. He would follow this up facing Vitor Belfort, who was on a 5-fight win streak, winning 4 of the 5 by KO. He would front kick Vitor in the first round and finish him with strikes to defend his world title. Some people may think this entry doesn't deserve to be here, but to defend his world title in a fight he was losing and being dominated in his toughest test, and to brutally KO a scary knockout artist in your next fight, the manner of the wins and the definitive finishes he got against 2 high-level opponents in his title reign definitely earned Silva a spot on the list. Number 9. Forrest Griffin. Many people, when you think of legendary back-to-back wins, would not think of Forrest Griffin, but he has 2 of the most legendary wins back-to-back in MMA history. In 2007, Griffin was at the midpoint of his UFC career and was having mixed success, but would be given the opportunity to welcome to the UFC, in many people's eyes at the time, the best light heavyweight in the world, Shogun, who was in his last 13 fights was 12-1, with his lone loss being an injury versus Mark Coleman. The two would square off at UFC 76, where after a back and forth battle, Forrest did the unthinkable, submitting Shogun via rear naked choke in the 3rd round to secure the legendary upset victory. Off the back of this win, a title shot was next against Rampage Jackson, who was on the best win streak of his career and the champion of the world. In a back and forth fight where both guys had moments of success, Forrest would win the decision on the judges' scorecards to secure the win and win the light heavyweight title. Compared to other fighters on this list who are some of the best in the sport, Forrest isn't ranked as highly as them in that sense, but his 2 upset victories is definitely some of the best back-to-back wins in history just due to the caliber of opponents and the streaks they were on. Number 8. Randy Couture. Randy Couture was a pioneer in the early days of MMA and created some legendary history across his career, which included becoming the first 2-weight world champion in the UFC's history. Across his career in 2002, Couture hit a rough spot, losing his heavyweight title to Josh Barnett, who tested positive for a banned substance, and then would fight for a vacant UFC gold, losing via submission to Rico Rodriguez. Couture was in a rough spot after 2 losses, but was offered a brilliant chance to bounce back versus Chuck Liddell for an interim light heavyweight title bout. This was Liddell on an excellent 10-fight win streak and had all the momentum on his side, even coming off a head kick win in his last fight. Couture schooled Liddell across a 3-round fight with his pressure and would eventually secure the 3rd round TKO after taking down Liddell and battering him on the ground in a legendary win after 2 losses in a brilliant upset. Winning the interim gold meant to unify the belt, where Couture would face reigning light heavyweight champion Tito Ortiz 3 months later, where Tito was on a 6-fight win streak with 5 consecutive title defenses. This didn't matter to Couture, where he out-wrestled and schooled Ortiz to win a unanimous decision to become the undisputed light heavyweight champion, beating Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz back to back. Now, to modern fans this may seem like nothing, but at the time this was legendary, and this was both these guys who were much younger and on great win streaks and closer to their physical prime, while Couture was 40 years old. But this wasn't a problem for the Natural, who secured 2 of the most high profile and legendary back-to-back wins in MMA history. Number 7. Henry Cejudo. Henry Cejudo on paper may actually have the 2 best wins of anyone on this list. Henry Cejudo, after winning Olympic gold, would make his way to the UFC, where he would work his way up the flyweight division to earn a title shot versus Demetrius Johnson, where he would be destroyed by Demetrius Johnson in 1 round and would go back to the drawing board and work his way back up to a title shot in a rematch against Demetrius Johnson, who was on an 11 consecutive title fight win streak, which is the best in UFC's history. Cejudo was quite the underdog going into their bout at UFC 227 due to the fact he had already lost convincingly to DJ, but also the fact this was DJ in his prime, who was undefeated in 6 years. The 2 guys had a great back and forth fight which was very competitive and close, but in the end Cejudo Cejudo would win the split decision and dethrone the best champion in UFC history and snap one of the best streaks in the sport's history. Following this, he would welcome TJ Dillashaw as his first flyweight title defense, who was coming down from bantamweight after becoming a two-time champion, dispatching of Cody Garbrandt twice. The two guys squared off, where in 30 seconds Cejudo would finish TJ to defend his title. However, TJ protested this as an early stoppage. In terms of name value, this is some of the best on this list. Just in practicality, it was a close win versus DJ, and also it was a TJ Dillashaw who was heavily diminished due to the weight class cut. Nonetheless, these are two great names to have back to back on Cejudo's resume. Number 6. Jon Jones. Jon Jones arguably has the greatest resume in the UFC's history and MMA history, and a set of wins which rivals any other fighter ever. So deciding which back-to-back wins of his are the best is difficult to figure out, but we are settling with 2 victories from his legendary year of 2011. In February of 2011, Jon Jones took on Ryan Bader at UFC 126 to find out who would be the next man to take over the division, where it was both guys looking to take their career to the next level, where Bader was 12-0 and undefeated. Jones would school Ryan Bader in a 2-round fight, dispatching of him comfortably, where after the fight it was announced Rashad Evans couldn't fight for the title. So Jones would fight for the belt 6 weeks later at UFC 128 against Shogun Rua, where Jones put on arguably his greatest performance at 23 years old, dispatching of the legendary Shogun with ease, where he would finish him in the 3rd round to become the undisputed champion and the youngest in UFC history. Yes, you can argue he has better back-to-back wins, beating Glover and DC back-to-back, or even DC and Gustafsson back-to-back, but to beat Ryan Bader, ending his hype train, and beating Shogun for the title at 23 and doing it only 6 weeks apart is so impressive, and is a fast turnaround which makes it much more impressive and well deserves it a spot on the list. Number 5. Rampage Jackson. Many people, whether it's due to his humorous antics, his stint in movies, or just his random and hilarious nature on his podcast, people forget Rampage Jackson in the octagon was a savage and was one of the best light heavyweights of his era. Rampage had a legendary career in Pride with some huge wins and losses. However, when he came to the UFC, he put on 2 of the most legendary back-to-back wins in MMA history. Rampage would join the UFC and KO Marvin Eastman, and would be facing at the time the best light heavyweight in the world, who was on a 7-fight win streak, all those wins coming via KO, while winning the light heavyweight title and defending it 4 times, Chuck Liddell. Rampage and Liddell squared off at UFC 71, where Rampage in just under 2 minutes would KO Liddell to become the undisputed champion and had just beaten the best light heavyweight in the world. He would follow this up 4 months later, defending his title against Pride champion Dan Henderson in a unification bout, where Henderson was coming off 2 legendary back-to-back wins versus Vitor Belfort and Wanderlei Silva. Across a 5-round bout, Rampage would win the decision to successfully defend his title and unified the UFC and Pride championships, where at that point in time he was undoubtedly the best light heavyweight in the world, beating champions from both the top organizations in the world. Number 4. GSP. Imagine having wins against 2 of the most legendary fighters of all time, one being arguably one of the greatest lightweight champs of all time, and one being one of the best welterweight champs of all time. GSP is undoubtedly the greatest welterweight of all time, and the 2 wins he scored in 2006 solidify that. While GSP was on the come up in the UFC, he would work his way up to a title shot versus Matt Hughes, losing via armbar in the 1st round at UFC 50. GSP following this would secure a 4-fight win streak and would face off against, at the time, one of the best fighters in the world, BJ Penn, who would already beaten the guy who'd beat GSP, Matt Hughes, at UFC 46. GSP in 2006 scored 2 legendary wins, where at UFC 58 in a competitive back and forth bout he beat BJ Penn by split decision. He would follow this up with a title fight against reigning champion Matt Hughes, who was on a legendary streak of wins, where GSP in 2 rounds would score the spectacular knockout to dethrone the best welterweight we have seen up to that point and would become the undisputed welterweight champion. Beating both BJ Penn and Matt Hughes back to back are 2 tremendous wins and well deserves a high spot on the list. Number 3. BJ Penn. BJ Penn is one of the most legendary fighters of all time with a deceptive record, as when you see a record of 16 wins, 14 losses, 2 draws, many fight fans would think journeyman or a bum, or just a really bad fighter. But in reality, BJ Penn was a true BMF of the early days of MMA, fighting from lightweight all the way up to light heavyweight. After failing to capture the lightweight title in a vacant title bout versus Carl Uno, Penn opted to go and face Takanori Gomi, who was at the time considered the best lightweight fighter in the world, even though he was coming off a loss. Gomi was 14-1 2001 and the best lightweight in the world in many people's eyes. He would face Gomi at Rumble on the Rock, where he would submit Takanori Gomi in the 3rd round via rear naked choke to win his first MMA title and beat the best lightweight in the world. 4 months later, Penn returned to the UFC, where he would be taking on welterweight champion Matt Hughes, who defended his title 5 times, where Hughes was the favourite going into the bout. At UFC 46, a 1-round bout took place where Penn would dominate Hughes on the ground, and towards the end of the 1st round, he would submit Matt Hughes via rear naked choke to become the undisputed welterweight champion. BJ Penn back-to-back beat the best lightweight and the best welterweight in the world, and he submitted both of them. To beat the 2 best in the world in 2 different weight classes back-to-back 4 months apart is one of the best set of back-to-back wins in MMA history. Number 2. Islam Makhachev. This man definitely has a strong case for the number 1 spot, and if you argued it, I wouldn't blame you. Islam Makhachev, after his knockout loss to Adriano Martins, would work his way up the lightweight division at a steady pace, while his close friend and teammate Khabib was atop the division. Once Khabib was out the picture, he would go forward, pushing for a title opportunity. After amassing a 10-fight win streak, he was next in line for Charles Oliveira, who cleared out the top of the division, who was on his own legendary win streak of 11 wins with 10 finishes, with much more elite competition wins than Islam Makhachev. The two squared off at UFC 280, where Islam Makhachev, though he had never faced the highest level competition in the division, showed he was the best of the best, schooling Oliveira, where in the 2nd round he dropped Oliveira and would eventually get the arm triangle to snap the 11-fight win streak of Charles Oliveira. For his first defense, Islam would face Alexander Volkanovski at UFC 284 in Australia, where Volk was coming up from featherweight looking for champ status. The two had a legendary fight and one of the highest level fights in MMA history, with pound for pound number 2 versus pound for pound number 1. It was a close contest, but Islam Makhachev got the nod on the scorecards to snap the 12-fight UFC win streak of Volk and the overall 22-fight win streak of his MMA career, beating Volkanovski and Charles Oliveira in their primes on their best win streaks of their career. You can argue it as number 1, just the Volk fight was close and Volk was a 145er coming up. I know you will all say he head-kicked Volk in the next fight, but this is the best back-to-back wins and just how the cookie crumbles, but nonetheless this is a legendary set of back-to-back wins. Number 1. Ilia Topuria. The man who inspired this list and helped cause so much chaos in recent times. Ilia Topuria in 2024 has created some legendary history, which is being argued as the 2 best back-to-back wins in MMA history. Topuria would join the UFC in 2020 and would steamroll through the competition at featherweight, where Topuria would work himself up to a title shot against Alexander Volkanovski, who was argued as the best featherweight of all time. However, he was coming off his head kick loss to Islam Makhachev. Volk and Ilia had a 2-round bout where Ilia would lay Volk flat out cold in the octagon with a brutal 2nd round KO, beating one of the best pound for pound fighters in the world and arguably the best featherweight of all time. Ilia Topuria followed this up with his first title defense at UFC 308, defending against the legendary and pound for pound great Max Holloway, who some argue as the best featherweight of all time, if not number 2 behind Volk, where Max was coming off his legendary KO win against Justin Gaethje. Ilia would do the unthinkable and would flatline Max in the 3rd round, cracking the granite chin of Max Holloway, becoming the first man to KO Max in the octagon. Back to back, Ilia Topuria has beaten 2 pound for pound greats and arguably at the time the best and 2nd best featherweights in history, and he didn't just beat them, he put their lights out. This is easily the best set of back-to-back wins in MMA history, and yes, you can argue some of the others, but this was definitive. Ilia Topuria put Volkanovski and Max Holloway out cold, which is why it deserves the number 1 spot as the best back-to-back victories in MMA history. Did you enjoy the video? Let us know down in the comments below. What do you think are the best pair of back-to-back wins in UFC or MMA history? Put that down in the comments below. Leave a like if you've enjoyed the video and subscribe for more MMA and fight content coming soon. We hope you enjoyed the video and we'll catch you in the next one.